Eagles may fly, but it's the New Orleans Saints that are set to soar on Sunday. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as the Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst at WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, Taysom Hill returns to practice. Will he play? I'll tell you why. It could go either way. Got some bars for you early today. We're also going to dive into the defensive things the New Orleans Saints need to do to get a win against the Philadelphia Eagles, starting with limiting Jalen Hurts, containing him, and, of course, controlling that run game. And we're going to lead everything off. Take a look over the offensive side of the football for the New Orleans Saints as they look to keep the scoring rolling in New Orleans. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day, for being it every day or here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by friends over at Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app and then make sure that you head over to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code in all lowercase LockedOnNFL so that you can win $50 instantly when you play $5. If the New Orleans Saints want to get a win against the Philadelphia Eagles, it all starts with continuing to play to their brand and attack. The aggressive Derek Carr that we have seen so far this season has paid dividends for the New Orleans Saints. And a lot of that has come from the comfortability, of course, of the new offensive system led by new offensive coordinator Klint Kubiak. And a lot of the reasons why it's worked has been because of all of the different players that contribute from a ton of different ways. And, of course, Rashid, Shaheed attacking down the field. Look for the New Orleans Saints to continue to be aggressive and play to their brand of football. So far, the scripted plays at the beginning of New Orleans Saints offensive possessions, remember, typically the first 15 plays are scripted, have worked out great for the New Orleans Saints. Expect the Saints to continue to try to look to put points on the board early so they can continue to play with a comfortable lead or at least play ahead of their sort of standard, right? So let's take a look at my Jackson 5 for this week. It felt only appropriate to bring the Jackson 5 back after Derek Carr was unfortunately fined for his Michael Jackson celebration, which is the dumbest thing that I've ever heard. Well, not the dumbest thing. It is the NFL after all. But when we take a look at the first three things on the Jackson 5 list today, number one, control the ground game. Number two, push safeties and attack the intermediate area on the cloud side. I'll break that down here in a little bit. And then, of course, keep starting fast, because that has been Philadelphia's big struggle. Those are going to be the three keys over the offensive side that I want to start with. Let's start with controlling the ground game. This game has to be all about Alvin Kamara. This game has to be all about Jamal Williams and that, dare I say, outstanding offensive line for the New Orleans Saints and establishing the physicality early on in this game. That's got to be key for this New Orleans Saints defense, for this New Orleans Saints offense matching up with a Philadelphia Eagles defense that has struggled a bit against the run. A big part of it, we can look at like rush EPA, for instance. The Philadelphia Eagles right now, number 23 in the NFL in terms of efficiency on a per play value over on the defensive side when it comes to defending the run. The New Orleans Saints, number 2 in that metric on the offensive side. They have been outstanding when it comes to finding ways to impact the game from that area and being able to run the football. Again, 370 rushing yards so far for the New Orleans Saints, amongst the third most in the NFL right now. And, of course, being in a situation where you're looking at this team having the third most rushing yards in its franchise's history through the first 2 games. They're looking to continue to pile on when it comes to that. When it comes to rushing yards over the defensive side on a per rush basis right now for the Philadelphia Eagles, last in the NFL at 6.4 yards per carry surrendered. So this is big for the New Orleans Saints to get that ground game going, be able to control the clock that way, be able to build the confidence of your offensive line that way, keep some of the heat off of Derek Carr that way as well. It just helps make everything go. It's the grease that makes sure that everything in terms of the machine is working, seamlessly. Pushing the safeties And attacking the intermediate area on the cloud side is something that takes a look at how Philly plays defense. So this is all about the passing game here. When I talk about pushing the safeties, it's Rashid Shaheed threatening deep. It's Chris Olave threatening deep. But as they're threatening deep and pulling some of those safeties downfield, then you also need underneath that another crossing route coming across the field, or maybe another post, or maybe that could be an over route, it could be a dig, it could be whatever, that attacks sort of that 10 to 19 yard area down from the line of scrimmage. And then what that's doing, because Philly plays so heavy in cover three deep safeties, four underneath coverage players, and cover six, where you have a little bit of a cover two and cover four blend that's happening, where you still end up with three deep safeties. You're going to have areas of the field in the intermediate area, if you can push those safeties deep, that end up opening up opportunities for you to be able to attack the intermediate area of the field. And when I mention the cloud side, I'm specifically talking about Vic Fangio's cover six defense, but it is going to play a role in the cover three defenses as well, where we see what's called cloud coverage, i.e., a corner trying to get a little bit of a press on the receiver coming off the line of scrimmage, but then sitting and staying underneath, watching for any underneath routes. What that does is that if you have that underneath corner down at the bottom, and then you have a vertical route that's pushing the safeties deep, it's going to give you a little bit of a gap in between where that corner is and where that safety has gone. And if you're able to bring someone across the field to attack that side, that's going to be a place where the New Orleans Saints can indeed find a lot of success. We've seen it against the Philadelphia Eagles all season. They give up the majority of their passing yards down the perimeter. This is a big reason why, because they're still figuring out how to truly operate this Vic Fangio system with the staff and personnel that they have. So a big one to watch right there. And then finally on the offensive line, keep starting off fast. It has been Philadelphia's big struggle. I want to take you back to something that Gino Camilleri from Locked On Eagles said in yesterday's crossover Thursday episode. He talked about the Eagles struggling to start fast. The first two possessions in each of the last two games, in back-to-back games, first two possessions in week one, interception, fumble, two turnovers. First two possessions in the second game, punt and turnover on downs, again, giving the ball back to the offense. The New Orleans Saints, they've scored on every single one of those possessions. And in fact, at one point, they had scored on 15 straight possessions with Derek Carr on the field. The New Orleans Saints, of course, saw that streak come to an end with the pass that went off of Chris Olave's hand and ended up being an interception, but that's okay for New Orleans. If they can continue to start fast the way that they have not been able to in years, but have been able to very successfully here over the course of the first 2 weeks, partnering that with where Philly struggles in starting off early should be big for New Orleans. That would allow them to be able to play to their strength, which so far this season has been maintaining distance. They have to create that distance first. Starting fast will get you there. Coming up next, let's take a look at what the New Orleans Saints need to do on the defensive side, starting, of course, with limiting and containing the run game, starting off with Jalen Hurts. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by friends over at FanDuel, who still like the New Orleans Saints over at America's #1 sportsbook in this game against the Philadelphia Eagles. 2.5-point favorites at home against the Eagles in this one. That's a big shift from where things started for this team as they opened up the season. Really, really good to see for New Orleans. So the New Orleans Saints favorite in this one. You like them to win. You like them to cover. Well, you can get in on all of that action over at FanDuel today. And right now through September 22nd, so only a little bit more time to take advantage of this awesome offer. All FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with your already established YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to get every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account, a current form of payment, and you can cancel any time. Just visit FanDuel.com so that you can download America's #1 sportsbook. All right, family, the New Orleans Saints absolutely must keep Jalen Hurts contained and at bay. Otherwise, they'd run the risk of spoiling a game that they should win. We appreciate you very much for being here with us. Continuing on with our Jackson 5, our keys to victory for this team. We took a look at the three things over on the offensive side: control the ground game, push the safeties attack, and being able to attack that intermediate area underneath, and then keep starting fast, which Philly has struggled to match. And so now I want to take a look over the defensive side. Number one on the defensive side, or number four in our Jackson 5, is to keep Jalen Hurts contained, or as contained as possible. And then number 5, steal some possessions / scores. Now, I want to mention that controlling the ground game kind of operates on both the offensive and defensive side here, right? This is both sides of the trenches. But I do believe that for New Orleans, when it comes to their defense, that task really starts with quarterback Jalen Hurts, right? Not allowing him to be able to pick up a bunch of rushing yards, not allowing him to be able to go out there and extend plays and do all these other things to get other players involved. The New Orleans Saints secondary, especially if Marshawn Lattimore is back on the field. And then one other big injury to watch right now is Will Harris Jr., who missed Thursday's practice with a shin injury. So a big one to watch out for practice later on today, but we'll get to that here in a little bit. But even with those guys either hampered or one being out or the other, however it ends up going, the Saints secondary should still have the advantage over the pass catchers and route runners of Philadelphia, who will be without wide receiver A.J. Brown. And they lose a big part of their vertical attack when A.J. Brown is not in this game. So really what you're looking at doing in this case is really kind of in the passing game limiting Devonta Smith. However, if Jalen Hurts gets to a point where he's running and scrambling around and he's getting 6-7 seconds to throw the football, Britton Covey and all these other players, Dallas Goedert, whoever, like they're all going to get these opportunities to be able to be playmakers in the passing game. And so you're going to need to limit that. So when I talk about containing Jalen Hurts as much as possible, it's not just about the big 50, 60-yard runs. It's about the extension of a 3-second, pocket to being able to get outside the pocket, create, improvise, and turning that into a 6-second play with the ball in a quarterback's hands, while all these pass catchers and route runners get their opportunities to try to work themselves free in these scramble drills. You have to eliminate all of that. And then in the next level of controlling the run game is making sure that Philly doesn't get their run game off the ground going up against New Orleans. Now, Philly's run game hasn't been much to write home about. We were talking about EPA, or efficiency, on a per play value. How many points are you adding to your team each play? When it comes to the run game, it's not great for the offense over with the Philadelphia Eagles. They're 23rd in that ranking. I think I said earlier that their defense was 23rd. It's actually their offense is 23rd. Their defense is 31st in the NFL when it comes to run EPA. So even more important than for New Orleans to establish that and get better. But they're going up against the number 2 ranked run defense in terms of EPA. Saints are also number 2 on offense in EPA when it comes to that too. So you're looking at two sides of the coin big time when it comes to the conversation. One of the best rush offenses in New Orleans going up against one of the worst run defenses in Philly, and one of the worst run offenses for the Philadelphia Eagles going up against one of the best run defenses in Philly. That's a positive matchup, or best run defenses in New Orleans. That's a positive matchup for the New Orleans Saints. They're on the right side of that equation on both sides of the football. So that's really, really important to watch throughout this game as well, because that's going to tell the tale of this one, as far as I'm concerned, right? If you allow Philly to get a run game, that can play spoiler for you very, very quickly, and you end up dropping a game that you shouldn't be dropping because your defense is struggling. They're running the football. They're controlling the clock. They're keeping your offense on the sideline. That's the way that Philly's going to want to play this on the offensive side. New Orleans cannot let that happen. They have to dominate the way that they've continued to dominate, or at least dominate on one side of the football. And ideally, that domination is coming on the defensive side of the football, because that gives your offense the opportunity to be able to settle down a little bit, maybe not have to score 40 points to win a game, which they haven't had to over the course of the past 2 weeks. They just simply have. And right now, they're 42 points short of the 132 point mark, which is the most points scored in NFL history through the first 3 games. I don't expect them to exceed that total in this one. But if they can get to 28, 35, 30 plus points in this game, and the defense is able to keep Philly kind of uncomfortable in a way and keeping points off the board, that should help them quite a bit in this one. The last thing I want to look at when it comes to the defense is going to be stealing possessions and scores. If you caught yesterday's crossover Thursday, I kind of dabbled in this a little bit, but I just wanted to get a little bit deeper into this conversation because I think that this goes in a couple of different ways, right? So you can steal possessions by getting interceptions, by getting fumbles with special teams turnovers, such as blocked punts or muff punts and recovering those, or forcing, bobbles at the catch point when it comes to those punts, things like that. I think that those are ways where you can steal those possessions. And then you're looking to steal scores too. Can you get yourself a special teams touchdown? The Saints did it in week 3 last year, right? That was the Green Bay Packers game. Rashid Shaheed with the punt return touchdown in Green Bay. That's a big thing if you can go ahead and get something like that going in this matchup. Was that week 3 last year, or am I tripping? Hold on. I'm going to double check that to make sure I'm not completely crazy. No, that was week 3. Goodness gracious. It felt like this 2-0 start feels so different than last year's 2-0 start that I thought that the Saints Green Bay Packers loss, I was starting in my mind to think that that was like week 5 because they started off 0-2. I mean, 2-0. It couldn't have been that bad that quickly. It was. It's very different this year. So, yeah, getting a punt return touchdown or something like that ends up stealing a little bit extra momentum, that's going to be huge in front of this home crowd. That is going to be absolutely raucous. It's going to be nuts in the Superdome this week. And so if you're going to, or weekend, excuse me. And so if you're going to be able to get an interception, steal a possession, get a fumble recovery, or even better, Marshall Lattimore against the Philadelphia Eagles, it's pick 6 city for the guy. Is there an opportunity for him to be able to do something like that again, or you to be able to get that kind of a big time momentum shift, or stolen possession, or extra points going your way, things like that? All those things are going to help you in terms of the scoreboard, but it's going to flip that momentum big time in a Superdome that's going to be ready to burst in this game, right? I don't think the city of New Orleans has been this excited for a Saints game at home in a while, and it's so cool to see. And so I think that those opportunities where you can go out there and you can, to quote Dennis Allen, who was quoting Kendrick Lamar, pop out and show them. You know what I'm saying? And so if you get those opportunities to do that, it's there. So I think that those are the big key things over on the defensive side. Limit the run. Don't let Jalen Hurts get, Hurtsy and do the things that he does extremely well, because you're going to end up suffering if you do that. And then stealing that possession, getting that opportunity, potentially even putting points on the board in a non-offensive way, which the Saints have not done yet so far this season. They also haven't had to do it so far this season, so that's not an indictment of them at all, but it's just something that we haven't seen from New Orleans. Can they add that layer of additional dominance to what it is that they're doing? All right, coming up next, New Orleans Saints got a huge boost back at practice, but it was kind of counteracted with another loss at practice. Let's break that down because we need to know who's going to be on the field for the New Orleans Saints this Sunday in order to really understand what this was going to pan out to look like. We got that coming for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at PrizePicks, the easiest and most fun way to play daily fantasy sports. Let me tell you how this works. You pick 2 to 6 players. PrizePicks is going to give you a projection for that player. You can go basketball, you can go football, college football, whatever it is that you're looking for. They'll give you a projection for that player, and all you have to do is choose more or less. That's it. Nice and easy. 2 to 6 players. And if you get 4 of those right, you can win up to 100 times your money back in terms of your initial entry. You also have a lot of fun things where you can also play against guys like comedian Drewski and former failed rapper slash podcaster with horrible music taste and Joe Budden. So much for you to check out over at PrizePicks. It's super, super fun. So go ahead and get in on the action today. Just download the PrizePicks app and use the code LOCKEDONNFL. You're going to get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNFL on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. And you don't even have to win to receive that $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode with a look at the injury report to kind of get you the updates on the biggest names on the injury report, as well as I want to take a look at some players to watch in this game, including a defensive player that's kind of gone under the radar through the first 2 weeks, but might end up being very, very important to one of our Jackson 5 keys to victory that we discussed earlier. Let's start off with the biggest name on the injury report. No, not Marshon Lattimore, because he's still limited, right? Like, we think he's going to play this weekend. It sounded like he was ready to play. No big update there. But one big update here for a big-time New Orleans Saints player, that is offensive weapon Taysom Hill, who is back at practice after undergoing a hospital visit for a chest injury in that Week 2 game against the Dallas Cowboys. A little bit of a scary situation there for a little while in terms of what, like, you never like hearing about a player having to go to the hospital after suffering an injury on the football field, let alone going to the hospital with a chest injury, especially considering things that have happened over the course of the past couple of years. You get a little bit afraid when you hear something like that. But it seems that all has gone well for Taysom Hill and that he's avoided major injury. Does that mean that he'll be back out on the practice or back out on the playing field this weekend? Is the part that remains to be seen. Taysom Hill being a big part of the game plan up against the Philadelphia Eagles would make a lot of sense. We highlighted earlier how much the Eagles struggle to stop the run, how much they have struggled with missed tackles so far this season as well. These are all things that they've had some troubles with. And so being able to see a guy like Taysom Hill go out there and be able to perform against that defense, that's a pretty threatening opportunity if you're the New Orleans Saints and you're looking to present something like that against Philadelphia. So it'll be interesting to see how the Saints go about this, because my expectation is that so he was limited today on Thursday. My expectation would be that later on Friday, when he's at practice, that he'll be limited again if he is indeed still at practice, right? There could be a situation where they got him out there on Thursday. Things didn't look the way that they wanted to look, shut him down for the rest of the week, get him back at the beginning of next week. It would make total sense. So Friday's injury report later on, that's going to be the biggest thing that you're going to be watching when it comes to Taysom Hill. But I'll be curious to see if he's limited, but they still want him to play. Do they maybe holster him until the second half to see, do we really need him? Kind of like what they did against the Cleveland Browns years ago. So it could be an interesting little bit of gamesmanship that goes on with that. Now, of course, it is injury news, so it wasn't all good news for the New Orleans Saints, even though they had a very short did not participate list. Colin Saunders, who we actually saw out there in uniform, he just didn't participate enough to move into limited status, but good to still see him. Presence is still progress in this situation, so maybe Colin Saunders, the starting defensive tackle, is on pace for a Week 4 return. We'll watch out for that. And then, of course, still Landon Young dealing with his foot injury. But one new absence with a shin injury was starting safety Will Harris Jr., who's been a big piece of the success that New Orleans Saints has seen over on the defensive side. He missed Thursday's practice with that shin injury. He was listed as a did not participate, or a DNP. You'll see on those injury reports. So that's a big one to watch. Tyrann Mathieu and Will Harris have looked really good as the starting safety tandem next to one another. Tyrann Mathieu telling me that he thinks of Will Harris as the Thunder while he's the Lightning, although both of them brought some thunderous hits against the Dallas Cowboys last week that made some major moments for the defense. So definitely one to watch. If Will Harris is not able to go, I would expect Jonathan Abram to be elevated for this game off the practice squad, but Jordan Howden to start next to Tyrann Mathieu. But you're going to need some numbers at the safety position, somebody that can also contribute for you on special teams, and Jonathan Abram absolutely checks those boxes. But let's wait and see what happens with Will Harris. Maybe he was downgraded on Thursday with that shin injury, but might be good enough to practice on Friday and be limited. We've seen both the New Orleans Saints be aggressive in terms of return timetables. We saw what happened with Taliese Fuanga last week. Didn't practice for the last 2 days of practice, but as a rookie, still started and played the entire game against Dallas and performed wonderfully, by the way, in doing so. But then we also saw the Saints be very cautious with Marshon Lattimore and his hamstring injury. When Marshon Lattimore wanted to play, Dennis Allen saying, nope, don't want the 1 week thing to turn into a multi-week thing. Take it easy. That's why we're hoping to see and expecting to see Marshon Lattimore back on the field this week, because of the wise decision that the team made around him last week. So how New Orleans plays the Will Harris thing remains to be seen, but the injury report later on Friday will absolutely give us a pretty good indication of where all of that is headed. All right. Want to take a look at some players to watch over on the offensive and defensive side. I'm actually going to start on the defensive side because there's something very intriguing to me on the defensive side. So I got 3 players to watch here. Number 1 is Chase Young, the New Orleans Saints defensive end. Number 2 is Paulson Adebo, the New Orleans Saints cornerback. And then number 3 is Willie Gay Jr. with a little bit of a question mark. So I want to start with Willie Gay Jr. here. The reason why I end up putting him and listing him there with a question mark is that Willie Gay Jr. at most has played still less than 15 snaps in each of the games that he's appeared in over the course of the first 2 weeks of the season. But does that change this week because of the fact that he has that sideline to sideline ability? He has the speed, he has the wherewithal, he's a solid tackler. Could he potentially be really valuable in this game for the New Orleans Saints going up against quarterback Jalen Hurts of the Philadelphia Eagles? I think there's some truth in that. I think there's a real chance that he could be a guy that ends up actually seeing a boost in snaps when the team goes against these very mobile quarterbacks, right? We know Bryce Young can get loose and kind of extend plays and all those other things. Them playing against the Dallas Cowboys last week, maybe a little bit of that with Dak Prescott, but certainly not as much as before that injury that he had a few years ago. But Jalen Hurts, very much still that guy. So does Willie Gay Jr. maybe see more opportunities here because of what he might be able to bring you as somebody to help contain from that second level and spy the quarterback, all those other things. There's a little bit of Madden language there to talk about spying the quarterback, but still something that you do see in today's NFL. The Saints have tried that in the past with Pete Werner and other linebackers and haven't found too much success out of it. So could Willie Gay Jr. be the kind of secret weapon in this game for this big X factor moment to watch on the defensive side? As for Chase Young, he's got familiarity with both Jalen Hurts and offensive coordinator Kellen Moore over in Philly, because before Kellen Moore was in Philly, he overlapped at one point with Chase Young in the NFC East a few years ago as the Dallas Cowboys offensive coordinator. So a little bit of knowledge there from Chase Young, who might be able to do that, who might be able to whisper in the ear of Dennis Allen and some of the other defensive players so they know what to expect. And then Paulson Adebo, who is tied for the league lead in forced incompletions, according to Pro Football Focus. He's been on a tear. Even, yes, with the missed tackle that led to a big 60-plus yard touchdown for CeeDee Lamb last week, we still know how good Paulson Adebo is, and he's continued to prove it. Over on the offensive side, your trio, right? The holy trinity of the New Orleans Saints offense over the course of the first 2 weeks has been quarterback Derek Carr, running back Alvin Kamara, and then wide receiver Rashid Shaheed. I don't care which one you think's the onion, which one you think's the bell pepper, which one you think's the celery. They're the holy trinity, and they have been absolutely outstanding for the New Orleans Saints. If those three guys are cooking and they're doing the things they need to do, and other players are getting involved, obviously Chris Olave, I don't mean to leave him out of this conversation. He is still the top wide receiver in terms of options. We just know what it's looked like over the course of the first 3 weeks or 2 weeks, and those three guys have cooked together big time. But look, Jamal Williams is going to be important. Juwan Johnson's going to be important. Foster Morrow is going to be important. There's going to be so much of this that we're going to be watching all throughout, where you can say, oh, man, a lot of these players have a lot of opportunity here to make plays on the offensive side and contribute to what should be a victory for the New Orleans Saints. And look, I'll put my eggs in one basket here and say I think the New Orleans Saints absolutely should win this game. And I look forward to watching this because I think this is going to be very, very exciting. So there's your game plan. That's your Jackson 5. Those are your players to watch, your injury updates, all of it. Come back for more here right ahead of Sunday's matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles. And then we'll be live after that matchup from the Superdome floor, as always, as well, recapping it, win or loss. But I think we'll be talking win and a 3-0 start for the New Orleans Saints for the first time in a long time. All right, y'all, we appreciate you very much making us your first listen of the day every day. Make sure you go and check out for your second listen today, Locked On NFL, Tyler Rowland, as well as Tony Wiggins, giving you a double daily dose of NFL talk. Myself and Tyler breaking down some great stuff ahead of the weekend as well. So you can go and check that out over wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for making this a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. Trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.